6 18th Street, interviewing Jim and Madge Ramsey, my grandparents. They recently had their 57th anniversary on July 1st, 2007, so I'm here and I'm going to ask them a few questions. Here we go. Hello.
Hello, Emily.
Could you introduce yourselves? Wait, I just did that, but...
I'm Jim Ramsey, and this is my wife, Madge.
Hello.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions. How did you two meet?
Well, I'll let Jim tell you about that because he is always bringing up how he saw me walking across the street. So let him tell you how he met me, okay?
All right.
First, we have to go back to the 7th grade. We were playing 7th grade.
No, you didn't know me.
I'm sorry, that's another girl.
You didn't know me in the 7th grade.
Uh-oh, we found a controversy.
Okay, when did we play? What's this game?
I didn't go to Tyler until
No,
9th grade.
answer my question. But I'd hate to start a fight right here on camera. Was it the 9th grade that we were playing? What did we play?
The Ouija board.
The Ouija board.
Oh.
Okay, erase all that.
Okay.
In the 9th grade, we were in high school, and we happened to be in the auditorium along with other students, and we, for some reason, had a Ouija board. And the Ouija board said that we were going to marry. And so that proved to be correct. So, be careful with these Ouija boards.
I will.
But to answer your question, actually what happened was this. I had seen her and had gone to school with her for a few months, and I saw her walking across the street from one building to the other, and I thought, man, what a nice looking little lady.
Aww.
And so from there on, she didn't have a chance. I pursued her and won.
Somehow the other, in between, after this, I'd given him a picture of me. You can imagine I was in the 9th grade or something like that. And anyway, he came over and I was a monitor in high school. And you took up passes, you know, if they could go so and so. And so he came over and he said, got right up in my face. And so he kissed me. Oh, that made me so mad. Mad. I said, I want that picture back, and I want it back. And that's what it brought it all on, wasn't it? Because you wouldn't give me my picture back, right?
She kissed me. I didn't kiss her. It was different.
Anyway, I had a girlfriend that was in the restroom, and I went in the restroom and I said, Hazel, I said, told her all about what happened, you know, and I said, oh, I just hate him. So from there on, why, he kept pursuing me. He'd come by and do this and do that, you know. Well, I was taking shorthand, and he was at a school, at a different building across the street from him. And I sat at another monitor. That he had to come by. He and a bunch of the other boys would come by. And he said, well, write me a note. And I said, I'm not going to write you a note. So I got tired of him saying that, so I wrote him something in shorthand. And so then he said, what does it say? I said, I'm not going to tell you. So anyway, this went on for a while. And you want to say how we finally...
What I did was, when she handed me the note, I took it, called her that night, and asked her to read it to me. She wouldn't do it. Finally, after persistence, she read it to me, and it was something like, I don't care for you, this, that, you know. But being the nice guy that I was, I didn't give up, and I ended up asking her for a date. Now the date ended up us going to City High School field, watching Tyner and City High School play football.
What grade was that in?
The 11th grade, yeah. And so we were sitting there, and her quote other boyfriend was playing football. And so about halfway through the first half, he sent his crony up to see if she would be ready to go home with him when he left the stadium. I let him know that she was on the date. So we spent a miserable half of football. We didn't we liked each other, but at the same time we just were not hitting it off. So she being nice, me being nice, we just tried to make the best out of a bad situation. And it started raining. And it started raining at halftime, and we ran to the car. By the time we got into the car, we was soaking. And it was raining so hard it wouldn't be safe to start driving. So we sat there, and the only thing we had was a handkerchief. I had a handkerchief, and I graciously gave it to her, and she blotted her face, and then I wiped my face, and we started talking, and first thing you know, well, we found out we liked each other, or at least I liked her. And I told her, I said, you know, I'm going to marry you, and she laughed at me.
Yes.
And so then I took her home, told her to call me. She said, I don't call boys. So,
No, you didn't call boys then.
So I ended up the next morning, Dad come in and woke me up. He said, who was you with last night? And I said, Madge. He said, well, here's a pocketbook, or billfold that she left in the car. He said, you better call her, she'll be worried about it. I said, So I took it, laid it up, kept waiting. Finally, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, phone rang.
Let me then interject and do this now. As he said, girls didn't call boys then. And he had been calling our house, and my mama called him that little Georgia boy because he was not slow speaking, but soft speaking. And so I said, oh, Mama, I've left my billfold there. Call him and tell him. Ask him about it. She said, no, I'm not calling him. She said, you can call and ask him. I said, oh, please, you know. So finally, she never would, so I called him. And the first thing he said to me was, I thought you didn't call boys. Now, y'all let you say what happened then.
So then, I had an excuse to get her billfold back to her.
I still think he stole it and kept it in the car.
Well, you know what I think?
What?
That was her excuse of being able to pursue this thing, because she didn't know where I was going to ever call her or not. And she wanted to make sure that she latched on to me.
And then pick up on it then.
But then from there we started dating. And
Not very often, you know.
it would be on the weekends, and it would usually be on Saturday. And I would pick her up about 7 o'clock on Saturday, but I had to have her back home by 11 o'clock. And so that was, then we would see each other in school. And our principal, Mr. C.C. Bergner, he decided he didn't like these couples, quote, in school. And while they were doing nothing but walking to class together and not even holding hands or anything like that, you just didn't do that. You'd meet at the locker or something like that. But anyway, he decided that he was going to break up these couples. And he started calling them in one at a time, a couple at a time. And I heard what was going on, so I went in and talked to him, and I said, Mr. Bergner, I understand you're breaking up these couples. I said, I wanted you to know that we're doing nothing wrong, that my mother and dad knows about it, and her parents know about it, and don't call her in here and get us all upset because we haven't done anything. And I never did hear any more out of it.
That's cool.
Now we were in the 11th grade at that time.
I couldn't imagine Mr. Rockholt doing that.
I know.
There would be a rebellion.
Well, see, the times have changed. Yeah.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
with that was 11. That was in 40. Well, almost 48. 48 then. 1948. In the 11th grade.
So we basically went together for 3 years before we ever married.
Right.
And it was just a matter of going, and what we would do on our
Dates?
dates, there was in Chattanooga and Brainerd, there was a drive-in theater called the Skyway.
I've heard of that.
And this is back in the heyday of the drive-in theaters, so, and it would really get crowded, and they had boys that had fluorescent flashlights with arrows on it, and they would direct you to where to park. One of her boyfriends, quote, quote, the same one that played ball, he and his buddies would have to direct us to park.
Oh, let me tell you this funny thing. I was pretty much of a churchgoer. And that was morning and at night too. And you had what they call a youth group at night, more or less like they do now. And so Benny was the other guy's name. One of the other guys. Well, he would.
One.
What?
See, I had to fight off
Wow.
a bunch of them. This was one just thick.
And you won.
Yeah, that he came over and went to church. And now when Jim found out that he was doing that, then he started coming to church too. So here I had Benny, and I had me, and I had Jim there.
And I would walk in and see him sitting there. I'd walk up and sit down by him. And one time I called over on Sunday afternoon. She answered the phone and she sounded funny. I said, "Somebody there?" And she said, "Yeah." Well, it wasn't no time till there was two somebodies there. I knocked on the door, she opened the door, and I said, "You ready to go?" Making him think that we had a date, which we did not have. He gets up and leaves. See, you got to use your head. When you know what you want, you got to go after it.
Oh yeah. Oh, that was a funny thing. And then he'd have little run-ins with some of them every so often. They'd chase him in their little cars home, because I lived over in East Brainerd and he lived over in East Chattanooga.
So I took her home one night and I looked up and there was Benny Eves and 3 of his buddies in their car. And they're just right on my tail. And so they followed me all. Now these guys, I mean, they're nice people, nice boys. They wasn't
Oh
going,
yeah.
but they just wanted to scare me off. But here's what happened. I had them follow me all the way home.
Now,
but
what year cars did you all have?
Well, now I was driving my dad's car back then
And it
because,
was what?
yeah,
Year.
it was a 1940 Chevrolet.
Cool.
But I had an automobile, but it wasn't safe enough to drive of a night because of you didn't have good lights and didn't have good brakes on it, you know, as far as what their car was. So with my precious cargo, I had to, they wanted me to drive their car. But anyway, this particular night, they was right on my tail. And I wasn't going to stop, wasn't going to let them get in front of me or anything like that. So finally, I thought, well, there was a place in East Chattanooga called Jackson's Manufacturing, and this is where the upholsterers worked. And they had the windows open during the day, and they would spit tacks. They would get a mouthful of tacks. They had a hammer that had a magnet on the end of it, so they spit. That's how they did the upholstery.
Upholstery.
Well, when they got ready to go to lunch or take a break or something, they had those, they did out the window. So if you don't know what you're doing, you could get a tire full of tacks. So what I did was I took them by there. Guess what? They had a flat tire. So I went home and went to bed and they changed the tire. And they never followed me anymore.
And what did they say to you next day?
They told me, says they're never going to let me take them into my territory anymore.
Oh, man. Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, You outsmarted her.
Oh yeah, had to. But then from there, I think he gave up because by then she decided she maybe wanted to be with me for a while.
Aw.
Yeah, so by the time we were senior in high school, we pretty much were dating like that. And let's see, what else, Jimbo? That the senior year was sort of uneventful, wasn't it? As far as all the trouble with other boyfriends and all that, you know.
Well, we had some teachers that was real nice, then we had some that was not so nice.
Oh yeah, we had one particular.
One particular teacher, a lady by the name Ms. Johnson, I mean, she was just soured on the world. And so
You had teachers like that.
Yeah.
and we would study over the telephone. We'd get her books, we'd study over the telephone. And so there apparently a time or two we'd take a test and we'd make the same grades. Well, this teacher was determined to find out why we was cheating.
We never cheated.
We never cheated.
Never
But she would move me over here and move Madge back there, and she moved us all around, stand over us and this, that. And so we decided, we both was pretty smart in this subject, so we could afford to do this, so we decided, I don't care if it's who's your mama. On number 2, you're going to miss it. You're gonna get the wrong, so we're going to miss the same ones. So we did that a couple of times and just worried her death so she couldn't figure out how we was doing it. Kid-like, crazy-like.
That's funny.
So we outdid her. we outdid her on that one. Anyway. And let's see, we graduated from high school on May 23rd, 1949. And then a year later, we were engaged. So that was about 3 years or more that we did go together.
Yeah.
So when we graduated, I had a job at Devonport Hosiery Mill. And Madge.
And so I was going to Edmondson's Business College.
Wow.
So I went to work and she went to business school. And I worked there until I was drafted in the Marine Corps. And we had married July the 1st, 1950. And I was inducted in the Marines February 29th, 1952.
Okay. So then after that, why let me think now. When he had to leave to go to the Marines then, Mr. and Miss Ramsey, his mother and dad, lived in Georgetown, Tennessee. They had just recently moved up there from East Chattanooga.
200-acre farm. Ma and Pa cattle on the farm. They didn't know what they were doing.
About it. So
had cattle and horses. And
yeah, a little bit of everything. So I went up there and stayed with them while he was in basic training. So when he got out of basic training, then Miss Ramsey and I went down to Camp Lejeune where he was stationed for basic training.
No, Paris Island.
Paris Island, excuse me. Got that out. That's right. Thank you.
Been there, done that, so I know.
Yeah, you do know. And so then Jim got a leave and got orders to go to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And did that. So then the two of us, Mrs. Ramsey and myself, Mommy, we went to North Carolina. So Jim and I lived in North Carolina for 2 years, 52 and 54, those 2 years, in Wilmington, North Carolina, and went to the Wrightsville Beach, lived close to the Wrightsville Beach, and went to the beach every day. And we were very fortunate that he never had to go overseas during that period of time. This was during the Korean War.
We had bought a brand new 51 Pontiac, and that way she was able to come to Paris Island and come up there. And I ended up driving 100 miles a day, back and forth to the base.
Wow.
And when we come back home 2 years later, that car had 94,000 miles on it.
Wow.
Yeah. So, let's see, then we lived in a little apartment. You couldn't find a house or anything at that time. So, and oh, let me say, that's when I became pregnant with Eddie, your Uncle Eddie. And so we moved, I guess I was a couple of months pregnant when we came back to Chattanooga. And so then after about 3 or 4 months in an apartment, we found a new house on Aikens Drive.
That was being built.
It's being built. And so we moved out there, and lived there until, let's see, till your mother was born in October of '59. And then she was about 5 months old. Am I right? About 5 months old. And we moved to, no, she's a little bit older than 5 months old. She might have been maybe 9 or 10 months old. And we moved to Dalton, Georgia, where Jim was transferred to, we left this part out of that too. He was transferred to Dalton, Georgia. But we left out a part of your life right there, honey. That's your...
Well, what happened was when I worked at Davenport Hosier Mill and had to leave the job to go in the Marines because I was drafted. When I come back, I went back to Davenport Hosier Mill, and in the meantime, we were knitting full-fashion hose, the one that had the seams down the back.
Yeah.
And everything was going to what they call a circle knit, which was no seam at all.
I don't like those
and
much.
it was going in a different type of hosiery. So business wasn't that good. But anyway, I started going to business college. So I'd work in the 3rd shift from 11 to 7 at night. Come home, eat about, change clothes, grab the books, go to school.
Wow.
Stay in school till 3 or 4 o'clock. And did that. Then I happened to decide that I'm going to see what I can find. And I saw an ad in the paper for a credit manager for a paint company, Sherwin-Williams. So I went down at noon one day and put in an application. And about a month later, I got a call to come down and meet a man from Sherwin-Williams. They'd come in from Atlanta. Ended up, they hired me that day. I had long since quit my job in Davenport Hosier Mill, was going to school full time. And so what happened then was I went to work at the Brainerd store as credit manager. And after, that was in 1957, and in 1960, it was 1960, we transferred to Dalton as manager.
That picks up where we had left out a few minutes ago. But we lived in Dalton. Well, here we moved down there with your Uncle Eddie, and then your mom. And we couldn't, there was no place to buy a house. You could not get a house anywhere. So we got an upstairs apartment, lived there, and found a lot and had a house built. So we built the house and moved into it, in about 61 or 62, somewhere like that.
And the house that we had on Pin Oak Heights, the one that we first had built, the couple that bought it was on their way back to Pennsylvania, and this was on the way to the airport. And one morning about 8:30, there was a knock on the door, and you can imagine what the house looked like. I've gone to work,
have 2 children,
2 kids, and not expecting anybody. And here's this real estate, was it a lady? Real estate lady apologizing, but they had driven through the subdivision, killing time.
Pin Oak Heights is where we moved to.
Killing time till time to get them to the airport. They hadn't found anything they wanted, and they saw this house and saw the for sale sign and come in and wanted to know if she would let them look at it. They walked through the mess, which was an organized mess, you can imagine. But they ended up buying the house.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So we then ended up into the apartment. And while we were in the apartment, we had the house built.
That's when we moved to Dalton. But guess how much the Pin Oak house cost us?
How much?
$11,500.
Wow.
What'd you sell it for? 17.
And sold it for $17,000.
Wow.
Moved up here. We moved to well, we haven't gotten to that yet, but we'll pick up on that. Then we stayed in Dalton for 5 years.
Yes.
And in 1964, they asked Jim, Sherman-Williams asked Jim to move to Cleveland and for a manager's job up here. I was elated because I didn't particularly care for Dalton because it was just like a one-horse town. But I mean, there wasn't anything to do.
Clannish.
Real clannish. We belonged to First Baptist Church, and that's where our friends were down there. So we did.
They didn't like strangers moving into
No.
their town.
So anyway, we
Kind of
moved.
snobby.
Right, so he came up here in 1964, and he went back and forth
For 6 months.
for about 6 months. Uncle Eddie was in the first grade. Right, he was in the first grade. That's right, isn't it? I can't, we're sort of hazy on that. In the first grade. And then we moved up here in 65, I guess September of 65. And we had a cat, Maltese cat. And he was he was in the trunk. Put him in we had a Corvair, and he had
And the trunk was in the front.
And we moved him in the trunk. Up here, didn't have the dog, we had the cat. So in the meantime, though, while he was up here, Jim was up here, they were building this house, and Everhart there was only 1 or 2 houses over here. And so he saw this house, and so we came up to look at it. And so that's when we moved up here in 65. We bought this house, but still had the one in Dalton. So we moved up here still owing for this house and the one in Dalton. But lo and behold, we hadn't even put it up for sale, and this lady, we moved on up here, and the realtor called and wanted to know if she could take them through to, see it. And you pick up on that one from there.
Well, actually, what happened, we decided that we might as well move up here because this house was finished, and there's no sense we got much invested up here as we did down
and
there.
Eddie had needed to be in school.
So what we did was I called a realtor down there and told him that we was moving, and we're not even going to sweep it out or nothing. Don't show it until we get back there to clean it out. Well, the next day I went to work after moving in here, went by the store, and they said, your realtor wants you to call him. So I called him. He said I wanted to come by and see what the house looked like. Said I had some clients with me that wanted to look at a farm. So I walked in and said I was looking it over, and said I heard them come in the kitchen, and says they ended up putting down $500 earnest money. They decided they wanted to buy your house. So we got a contract on it, nothing.
Wow.
So that was April Fool's Day,
65?
Yeah, 65.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when we got up to Cleveland and everything moved in up here, why then it was time then to start school. So Eddie was in the 6th grade, and your mother was going into kindergarten. At that time, you didn't have the schools with kindergartens. You had churches. So she went to Westwood Baptist Church Kindergarten, and Eddie was down at George R. Stewart Elementary School. And where can we pick up after that then? Oh,
Check the time.
5:15.
Uh-uh.